Wyoming Territory. Summer of 1888, the sun beat low against the Medicine Bow Range when Wilma Clarke stepped down from the freight wagon, her boots sinking into the dry red dust of Elk Bend. She adjusted her shawl, sweat already gathering at her neck, and stared at the rickety sign nailed to the depot post. Elk Bend, Pop 312. It had been 5 days since the stage broke down outside Rawlins. Another 2 in the back of a cattle wagon got her this far. She was tired. Her back ached. But worse than that was the weight in her chest, not from the journey, but from everything she carried with her. "Come on, Nora Nevin," she called softly. Her children clambered down behind her. Nora, 11, stuck close to her side, arms wrapped tight around a worn rag doll. Nevin, 9, squinted at the dusty town with the wary eyes of a boy who had seen too much too young. "This is it?" he asked. Wilma ran a hand through his tangled brown hair. "It's where we start over." She was 43, heavy-set, her bones tired and feet swollen from the road. She had been a ranch wife once. Then her husband died 2 years ago in Kansas, and the land got taken before winter. She had no family left and no one waiting for her. A man named Lester Baird, part-time preacher, full-time liar, had promised her a job and room in Elk Bend. But when she arrived, the depot clerk told her Lester had skipped town 3 weeks ago with a widow's savings and a barmaid on his arm. Wilma didn't cry. She gathered both children close, looked around the near-empty street, and said, "We'll figure it out." From across the street, a man stepped down from the porch of the blacksmith's shop. Tall, lean, with a sun-worn face and a lopsided hat. He paused mid-step when he saw her. His name was Yates Harlan. He was 38, a cattleman turned horsebreaker, with a quiet way about him and hands strong from years of work. He watched Wilma a moment, then crossed the street. "You need help, ma'am?" he asked. Wilma turned, chin high. "No, we'll manage." Yates looked at the 2 children. Nora was clinging to her doll like it might vanish. Nevin was trying to look brave but kept glancing at Wilma, like he needed her to hold him up. "You look like you've been on the road a while," Yates said. "We have. You got a place to stay?" She shook her head. "We were supposed to." He nodded once. "Well, I got a cabin 2 miles out. Ain't much, but it's got 4 walls and a stove. You can come out for supper at least. I'll run you back after." Wilma hesitated. "I don't take charity." "Not offering charity. Offering supper." She studied him. His face was calm, no pity in his eyes, just a plain offer. Her stomach growled loud enough that Nevin turned red. "Fine," she said. "Just supper." The cabin was small but clean. A corral of half-broke Mustangs stretched out behind it, and a stand of cottonwoods gave some shade from the sun. Yates had a pot of stew going quick as anything, and while the children devoured it like starved coyotes, Wilma sat stiff in a chair by the window, hands folded over her lap. "You from Kansas?" Yates asked. "Yes, my husband had a spread outside Salina. Died of fever 2 winters ago." "Sorry to hear that." He glanced at the kids. "You were ranch folk?" "I handled the books. Cooked, sewed, helped in calving season. When he passed, I tried to hold the place. It wasn't enough." He did not ask why she had come all this way. He just nodded. After supper, Nora fell asleep on a wool blanket on the floor, and Nevin dozed off with his head against Wilma's hip. Yates met her gaze from across the table. "Why did you come here?" he asked. Wilma looked out the window. "Because I needed to go somewhere that did not know my name." He said nothing for a long time. Then, "You can stay here. For a few nights, anyway. Until you find your footing." Wilma's throat tightened. "I do not want to be trouble." "You're not. I'm not young, or small, or easy." Her voice cracked. "Most men look at me and see what is too much." He leaned forward, elbows on the table. "Well, I see a woman who crossed half a territory with 2 children and no help. You look like more than most men could handle, but I ain't most men." A silence stretched between them. Wilma felt something in her chest shift. Just a little. "All right," she said, voice quiet. "We'll stay a few nights." The next day, Yates hitched up his buckboard and took Nevin into town for nails and flour. While they were gone, Wilma washed the linens, mended one of his shirts, and swept the cabin. When he returned, he found her hanging clothes on the line, the summer breeze teasing her hair loose from its braid. He stood on the porch and watched her a moment. She turned, caught him looking. Her cheeks flushed, but she did not look away. That night, after the children were asleep, she sat beside him on the porch. The stars spilled over them, and the night air was warm. "I can work," she said. "Cook, clean, mind animals. I can pay my way." "I believe you," he said. He looked at her, saw the lines at her eyes, the way she carried herself, tired, yes, but not broken. Strong in a way he had not seen in a long time. "You're not too much," he said. "You're just right." Tears welled in her eyes, but she only reached out and laid her hand over his. He held it gently, his thumb brushing over her knuckles. And in that quiet night, something settled between them that did not need words. By the third morning, Wilma was in the garden before the sun lifted the edge of the sky. The soil was dry but workable, and she set to pulling weeds with her skirts tucked up, her fingers black with earth. Not far off, a young filly tested the fence line, its slender legs skittering as Yates worked it slow and steady with a long lead rope and a quiet voice. Wilma watched him a moment from where she knelt. He moved like someone who understood silence better than most things, each step measured, his presence more calming than commanding. She turned back to the garden and dug deeper. She didn't want to think about the warmth in her chest when she looked at him. Not yet. That afternoon, a woman rode up with a saddlebag full of dried herbs and a long braid of gray shot black hair trailing down her back. She dismounted without flourish and nodded toward Wilma, who was shelling beans on the porch. "Yates around?" the woman asked, voice low and steady. Wilma stood, wiping her hands on her apron. "He's at the corral. I'll wait." She dropped her bag beside the steps and sat on the lowest one, her eyes scanning the horizon like she expected someone to come riding up from nowhere. Wilma hesitated. "You thirsty?" The woman gave a small nod. Inside, Wilma poured water from the crock. When she handed it over, the woman took it without thanks, drank deep, then set it between her boots. "You his sister?" she asked. Wilma shook her head. "No, wife." Wilma's hand tightened on her apron. "Not that either." The woman studied her for a long beat. "He don't bring women here. Not ever. I didn't ask to be brought." "That's so?" Wilma didn't answer. She picked up the bowl of beans again, shelling in silence. After a moment, the woman leaned back on her elbows. "Name's Clara Harlow. I trade herbs and medicines along the range. Yates treated my boy's leg once when the marshal was too drunk to care." Wilma glanced up. "You a healer?" "Of sorts. My mother taught me. She was Shoshone. My father was stubborn and white." Clara's mouth twitched, not quite a smile. That made for an interesting childhood. Wilma cracked another pod open. "My children are asleep inside." Clara nodded. "Saw the boy in town the other day. Looked like he'd been chewing on a storm cloud." "He's got reason." "Most do." Wilma paused. "You come here often?" "Once every few months. He always buys peppermint for the colts. And salve for his hands." Wilma looked down at her own hands. Red, calloused, cracked at the knuckles. She hadn't thought much about them in a long while. Clara stood and stretched. "He's a good man, but he won't chase you. Not unless he knows you'd stand still long enough to be caught." Wilma met her gaze. I haven't run. Clara tilted her head. No, I don't suppose you have. When Yates came around the corner, he didn't look surprised to see Clara sitting on the porch steps. He nodded to her, then to Wilma. Everything quiet? Wilma didn't speak right away. Then she said, You've got good friends. He looked between them. Clara's more kin than most blood I've known. After she left, Wilma sat with him on the porch. The children were still asleep, tucked deep into the cool shadows of the cabin. The air smelled of sage and horse sweat, and the land stretched wide and gold and lonely. You ever think about leaving this place? She asked. Sometimes. But you don't. No, why? He reached down and rubbed his thumb against a rough patch on his palm. I built this with my own hands. Every board, every nail. I know this place. I know where the wind cuts through in the winter and where the sun hits warmest in February. I don't leave things I've built. She looked at him then, really looked. The set of his jaw, the way he held his shoulders like a man used to carrying weight alone. You know what it's like to lose your place? She asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Then, yes. Then you know what it means for someone to offer room. He met her eyes. I do. The wind picked up and rustled the cottonwoods. Somewhere in the paddock, a horse nickered low and soft. I'm not afraid of work, Wilma said. But I won't be kept like an extra dish on the table. If I stay, it's got to mean something. Yates didn't flinch. It already does. She reached over and laid her hand over his, not tentative this time, not testing. His fingers curled around hers slow and certain, like he'd been waiting for her to decide. Inside, the floorboards creaked, Nora shifting in her sleep. The moment held, steady as dusk settling over the plains. Then I'll stay, she said. Not for a few nights. For good. Yates nodded, his thumb warm against her wrist. That's what I hoped you'd say. 3 weeks passed, and the rhythm of the place settled into Wilma's bones like it had always waited for her. The mornings came early, but she rose before the rooster, her steps sure on the porch boards as if she'd walked them forever. Each day, the light shifted, the cottonwoods dropped more leaves, and the scent of hay ripened in the air. By late August, the nights cooled, and Wilma started putting heavier quilts on the children. Yates had finished fencing the north pasture, and Wilma had sewn new curtains from a roll of faded calico she found at the mercantile. They didn't match, but they let the morning in soft and golden, and she thought maybe that was enough. One afternoon, Wilma took Nevin and Nora into town to trade eggs and a jar of gooseberry jam for a new tin basin. Yates stayed behind to check a lame gelding's hoof, and Wilma offered to take the wagon, her hands steady on the reins. The general store had a wide porch and a scatter of idle men watching the street with the slow, lean boredom of late summer. As she tethered the mule, one of them, a narrow-chested man with a crooked vest and a tobacco-stained beard, tipped his hat and pushed off the rail. You Clarke? Wilma narrowed her eyes. I am. Supposed to be working for Lester Baird. You know he's gone. I'm aware. He nodded toward the children. You planning to stay long? As long as I'm needed. Town don't have charity to spare. Wilma didn't glance away. Good thing I don't need any. She gathered the children and stepped past him without waiting for reply. Inside, the store was warm and smelled of kerosene and flour. The shelves were mostly bare, but she found the basin she needed and some needles wrapped in brown paper. Nora ran her fingers along a jar of hair ribbons, and Wilma let her pick one. On their way out, the storekeeper, a quiet man with thick glasses, cleared his throat. Heard you're out at Harlan's place. I am. Good man, that one. Lost his brother in the war. Never talks about it. Wilma nodded, unsure what to say. The man adjusted his glasses. You're not like the others that passed through. She paused. How so? You didn't come empty. He gestured not to her hands, but to the children, to the basket of eggs, to the ribbon in Nora's braid. You brought something with you. Wilma didn't answer, but something in her chest eased. Back at the cabin, Yates was kneeling beside the gelding, hands gentle on the fetlock. When he looked up, she saw the dust on his shirt and a line of sweat at his collar. He stood as they approached, reaching to steady the basin where it jostled under her arm. "Town give you trouble?" he asked. "Nothing we couldn't walk through." He glanced at the children. "They do all right?" Nevin bartered 2 eggs for a stick of horehound. Nora's got a ribbon. He looked at the girl, who turned shy and tugged her braid over her shoulder. He gave a small nod of approval, then reached to take the basket from Wilma's other arm. "You didn't have to wait for me," she said. "I wanted to." That night, after supper, they sat on the back steps while the children played with a length of twine and a bent spoon. The moon was new, the sky darker than pitch. Wilma folded her arms against the chill. "That man at the store said you lost your brother." Yates didn't move for a moment. Then Ben. He was 19, joined up out of Cheyenne. Never came back. "I'm sorry. Nothing to be done now. I stayed behind. Pa had already gone, Ma was sick. I ran the place. Ben wanted more than horses and hay." Wilma was quiet. Yates rubbed his palm along his knee. "You think about Kansas much?" "Only when I wake up, and only for a moment." He turned toward her. "You miss him?" "I miss what I thought we had. He was a good man. But we were young when we started. Not much truth lived between us by the end." Yates nodded, almost to himself. Wilma looked out toward the corral. "You ever want a family? I used to think I wasn't meant for one. Then you showed up with yours." She reached over, her fingers brushing the back of his hand. "They're not just mine anymore." He turned his hand under hers, lacing their fingers together. "I'd marry you tomorrow if you asked," he said, voice low. Wilma's breath caught. "Why tomorrow?" "Because tonight it's too dark to see your face when you say yes." She pressed her forehead to his shoulder, laughter soft in her throat. "Then I'll say it now." He kissed her knuckles, his breath warm against her skin. "Then tomorrow," he said, "we'll make it so." In the quiet that followed, the children's voices drifted through the dark, and the stars blinked down like they'd been waiting for this all along. The wedding took place beneath the cottonwood trees, with wind threading through the branches and the late September light pressing gold against the grass. Yates wore his cleanest shirt, collar stiff from washing. Wilma had a fresh ribbon tied at the back of her braid, and her dress, though plain, had been carefully pressed smooth with the flat iron the night before. Nora held a handful of wildflowers, and Nevin stood beside Yates, jaw set like he was daring anyone to question what they were doing. It was Clara who said the words over them, her voice even and quiet, holding to no church but speaking with a weight that made the air still. When it was done, Wilma did not cry. She only looked at Yates, and he at her, and something passed between them that was fuller than joy and quieter than relief. It was certainty. That evening, after the children had gone to bed, Wilma sat at the table, piecing together a quilt square from scraps she'd saved since Kansas. Yates came in from checking the latch on the barn door and hung his hat on the peg by the door. "You always sew at night?" he asked, pulling off his boots. "Only when my hands won't sit still." He crossed the room and crouched beside her chair, resting one hand on her knee. "You feel settled?" She threaded the needle through a patch of faded check. "I feel like I've stepped into something steady. Not easy, but steady." He leaned his head against her leg. "That's what I hoped for." "I know." Later, when the fire had burned low and the cabin had gone quiet but for the wind brushing against the eaves, Wilma lay beside him, her palm resting over the pale scar beneath his collarbone. "You ever think you'd have this?" she asked, voice low in the dark. No, he moved her hand to his chest. But I wanted it. She traced the rhythm of his breath. I was told once I needed to be less to be loved. Quieter, smaller, thinner. You weren't too much, he said. They were too little. She closed her eyes. You make me feel like I belong in my own skin again. You do. Outside, a horse shifted in the corral. Somewhere an owl called out low and steady. The next weeks passed with the quiet insistence of late autumn. Wilma began baking bread every third morning, and Yates carved a new cradle by hand, smoothing the edges until the wood felt like river-polished stone. He didn't ask if she'd want more children. He just carved, and when she saw it, she didn't speak either. She only ran her hand along the edge and nodded once. Nevin started riding with Yates in the mornings, learning to bridle and curry, to listen more than speak. Nora helped Wilma with canning apples, her small hands sticky with syrup, her voice humming soft tunes Wilma hadn't heard since Kansas. One afternoon, as Yates repaired a broken gate hinge, Wilma came out with a jar of cider and a clean rag for the sweat at his brow. What would you have done if I hadn't stayed that night? She asked. He took the jar, drank, then looked at her. Built you a porch swing and waited. She smiled without laughing. You ever been in love before? No, not even close? He handed her the jar back. I knew a girl once. I liked her hair, but I didn't know what love looked like then. And now I know it looks like you with dirt on your knees and your hands full of work. It sounds like you sang my name in the quiet. Feels like coming in from the cold and finding the stove already lit. Wilma looked down at her apron, then back at him. I never knew if I'd be wanted again. Not as I am. Not by a man who didn't want to change me. You were never waiting to be wanted, he said. You were waiting to be seen. She leaned forward and kissed his temple, her lips lingering there, the way a woman does when she knows no one's watching and she's no longer afraid of tenderness. That night, they sat on the porch, the children asleep inside, a shawl around both their shoulders. Wind moved through the grass, and the stars blinked awake one by one. Wilma reached for his hand. You never said why you built this cabin so far out. He looked toward the hills. I wanted to hear myself think. And now, he turned to her. Now I want to hear you hum in the kitchen and Nora talk in her sleep and Nevin ask too many questions. She laughed, low and warm. That's a fine kind of noise. Yates kissed the back of her hand. It's the sound of home. And in the hush between wind and wood smoke, Wilma leaned into him. The weight of her years no longer something to hide, but something that had brought her here exactly where she was always meant to be. By late October, the first frost had come. The pumpkins in the back field turned hard and pale at the stem, and the mornings carried a bite that clung until near noon. Wilma stood at the stove with her sleeves rolled, lifting the kettle just before it whistled. Behind her, Yates ran a plane along a length of pine, smoothing the edge of a shelf he planned to mount above the hearth. Nevin sat on the rug, shaping a pile of corn husks into a crude horse, tongue pressed at the corner of his mouth in concentration. Nora was nearby, her reader open but forgotten, her gaze fixed on the small curls of wood falling from her father's work. Yates set the tool aside. You ever think we ought to add a room? Wilma turned from the stove, brow raised. You planning to grow us more children? He shrugged, brushing shavings from his lap. Could be room for more than just children. Clara's been saying she's got folks passing through who need a place to stay a night or two. Travelers. Women sometimes. Wilma poured the water over dried peppermint in the pot, considering. You want to turn this into a way station? Not a business. Just a place that's open if someone needs it. She brought the pot to the table, set it down gently. You think we've got that much to give? Yates looked at her then, the way he did when his thoughts ran deeper than the words he said. You gave me more than I had. I figure we should pass that on. She folded her hands around the mug he poured for her. Then we'll need more quilts. The next week, Yates brought in lumber from a sawyer he trusted near the river. Nevin helped unload, carrying what he could with a serious kind of pride. Wilma moved her sewing to the corner closest to the window, where the light stayed strongest through the afternoon. She started stitching heavier blankets, patching together worn wool and cotton scraps. Nora offered to help, and Wilma taught her how to pull the thread through even and slow, never rushing the corner seams. One evening, as Yates traced out the frame for the new room, he paused and looked over at Wilma, who stood by the stove, her hair wrapped up in a kerchief against the wood smoke. "Did you ever think you'd be building something again?" She turned the spoon in the pot, testing the stew. "I thought I'd spend the rest of my life surviving, not living." Yates came to her, rested one hand on the small of her back. "I want you to live easy now. Not soft, just easy, with peace in it." Wilma leaned into him. "It's already begun." By December, the new room stood finished. Simple walls, a narrow bed, a shelf for a lantern. They didn't expect visitors often, but the space was there, warm and waiting. Clara came by with a sack of dried apples and left with a tin of biscuits and a stitched shawl Wilma had made from leftover yarn. She didn't stay long, said the snow was coming deep that night, but she paused at the door. "You 2VE made something that'll hold," she said. Wilma nodded. "We didn't rush it. That's the only way it keeps." Winter settled hard, and the days shortened. Most mornings began with the sound of the kettle and ended with boots drying by the fire. Yates started reading aloud in the evenings a borrowed book of folktales from the town schoolhouse. Nora curled close to Wilma, and Nevin leaned into Yates's side, pretending he wasn't listening even as his eyes stayed fixed on the page. One night, after the children were in bed, Wilma sat on the rug, back against Yates's legs while he rubbed the tension from her shoulders. "Do you feel like you've found what you were looking for?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. Then, "No, I didn't find it. I built it. With you." She closed her eyes. "It's better that way." They passed the cold months like that, quiet, full, steady. When spring came, the thaw brought wildflowers early, and Wilma planted beans along the fence line. Yates rebuilt the east wall of the barn after a windstorm loosened a beam, and Nevin began sleeping with a slingshot under his pillow, though he wouldn't say why. Nora found a litter of kittens under the porch and named them after herbs. Wilma watched it all, the ordinary and the tender, the way it wove itself into something lasting. One afternoon, as she folded laundry in the sun, Yates came up behind her, his arms circling her waist. "I want to take you to the lake," he said. She turned in his arms. "The lake, up past the ridge. There's a flat stretch where the water's clear enough to see the sky in it. I want to show it to you." She smiled. "Now?" "No. When the wild roses bloom." She rested her forehead against his. "Then I'll wait for that." That summer, they rode up together, Nora and Nevin with Clara, for the day and found the lake just as he'd said. The water shimmered, ringed with roses and tall grass. Wilma stood at the edge, her skirts brushing the ground, and looked out over the water. Yates came up beside her, took her hand. "You see it?" he asked. "I see everything," she said. They didn't speak for a long while, just stood there, the sun warming their backs and the breeze carrying the scent of something sweet and green. When they rode home, it was slow, unhurried. The kind of ride you take when you've got nowhere to be but where you already are. That night, after supper, Wilma stepped onto the porch and looked out over the land. The children were inside, laughing over some game. Yates joined her, his arm brushing hers. She turned to him. "This life we've made, it doesn't feel borrowed." He nodded. "It's ours." She reached for his hand, and he took it without needing to be asked. And when the stars rose, they stayed there, side by side, not needing to speak, because everything worth saying had already been lived.